The Adventures of Silly Goose, learning important lessons with animal friends. Once upon a time, in a beautiful countryside farm, there was a silly goose named Gilbert. Gilbert was always up to something, and his animal friends never knew what to expect when they were around him. One day, as Gilbert waddled around the farm, he came across a group of animals gathered around a tree. Curious, Gilbert waddled over to see what was going on. As he got closer, he saw that the animals were trying to help a squirrel stuck in the tree. Once upon a time, there was a silly goose named Gigi. Gigi was no ordinary goose. She loved to play, tell jokes, and make everyone laugh. She lived on a farm with her animal friends, including cows, pigs, and chickens. The animals on the farm loved Gigi's playful spirit, and she was always the life of the party. One day, Gigi woke up feeling restless. She had been cooped up in the farm for too long, and she wanted to explore the world beyond the farm. So, she waddled up to the cows and asked them if they wanted to go on an adventure with her. The cows, who were always up for an adventure, were excited about the idea. Gigi told them about a pond she had heard of, where there were lots of fish to catch. The cows were not great at catching fish, but they loved the idea of exploring a new place, so they agreed to come along. As they set out on their adventure, Gigi couldn't contain her excitement. She was always the one to come up with silly ideas, and she had a few up her sleeve for this trip. The cows followed her lead, and they had a fun time together. As they walked, they passed through the woods, over streams, and across fields. Gigi was always up for a game of I Spy, and the cows were happy to play along. They laughed and joked as they walked, and it felt like they had been walking for hours. Suddenly, the group came to a fork in the road. Gigi, who had been leading the way, stopped and looked around. She had never been this far from the farm before, and she wasn't sure which way to go. The cows, who had been following her blindly, realized they were lost. Panic set in as they realized they had no idea how to get back home. Gigi tried to keep the mood light by telling jokes, but everyone was feeling uneasy. Just as they were about to give up hope, they heard a rustling in the bushes. Out popped a wise old owl, who had been watching them from a distance. The owl listened patiently as Gigi told him about their predicament, and then he spoke up. "My dear friends," the owl said, "you are not lost. You are simply on a different path. Follow me, and I will show you the way back home." Gigi and the cows breathed a sigh of relief and followed the wise old owl. They walked for a while longer until they reached a hill that overlooked the farm. There, they could see the barn and the silo, and they knew they were almost home. As they arrived back at the farm, the other animals welcomed them with open arms. They had been worried about their friends, but they were happy to see them back safe and sound. Gigi realized that while it was fun to go on adventures and explore new places, there was no place like home. She hugged her animal friends tightly and promised to be more careful in the future. The cows were happy to be back home, but they were also grateful for the adventure they had just experienced. They knew that Gigi's silly spirit had led them on a wild ride, but they wouldn't have it any other way. As they settled in for the night, Gigi looked up at the stars and felt content. She had gone on an adventure, made new friends, and learned an important lesson about the value of home. She closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the next adventure that awaited her. As the silly goose waddled along, it saw a group of ducks swimming in a nearby pond. The goose had always been curious about the water, but it was always afraid to take a swim. The ducks seemed to be having so much fun, though, that the goose couldn't resist joining in. With a running start, the goose jumped into the pond, but soon found itself struggling to stay afloat. The ducks laughed at the silly goose's attempts to swim and teased it for being so clumsy. Feeling embarrassed, the goose paddled back to the shore and sat down, feeling sorry for itself. But then it heard a soft voice say, "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it eventually." Looking up, the goose saw a wise old owl perched on a nearby branch. The owl had seen many young animals struggling to learn new skills, and knew that practice and patience were the key to success. Encouraged by the owl's kind words, the silly goose resolved to keep practicing and not give up. It may take some time, but it knew that it could become a great swimmer if it just kept trying. The next day, Silly woke up early and decided to go on another adventure. This time, he wanted to explore the nearby pond. He waddled over to his friends' houses and invited them to come along. As they walked towards the pond, they saw a family of ducks swimming in the water. Silly thought it would be fun to join them, so he ran as fast as he could and jumped into the pond. But as he hit the water, he realized he didn't know how to swim. Silly began to panic and flap his wings frantically, causing him to sink deeper into the water. His friends quickly realized what was happening and rushed to his aid. With their help, Silly was able to make it back to shore safely. Feeling embarrassed, Silly apologized for his recklessness and thanked his friends for rescuing him. From that day on, he made a promise to himself to always be careful and listen to the advice of his friends. As they walked back home, Silly felt grateful for the friends he had and the important lessons he had learned. He knew that he still had a lot to discover and explore, but he was excited to do it with his newfound wisdom and caution. And so, Silly's adventures continued, filled with laughter, fun, and valuable life lessons. The next day, the silly goose woke up to the sound of the birds chirping outside. It felt excited to continue its adventures with its new friends. It walked out of its nest and saw its friends waiting for it outside. "Good morning, silly goose. Are you ready for another adventure today?" asked the rabbit. "Of course." "What adventure are we going on today?" asked the silly goose. "Well, we were thinking of going to the pond on the other side of the forest. We heard that there's a new family of ducks that moved in and we wanted to say hello," said the squirrel. "That sounds like a great idea." "Let's go," said the silly goose. The group started walking towards the pond. On their way, they passed by a group of animals that were cleaning up the forest. They were picking up trash and putting it in bags. "Hey, what are you guys doing?" asked the silly goose. "We're cleaning up the forest. We want to make it a cleaner and healthier place for everyone," said the bear. "That's a great idea. Can we help?" asked the silly goose. "Of course. The more, the merrier," said the bear. So, the silly goose and its friends joined the group of animals and started picking up trash. They worked together, and soon enough, the forest was cleaner than ever before. "Thank you for helping us clean up the forest," said the bear. "No problem. It's important to take care of our home," said the silly goose. After finishing their work, the group continued walking towards the pond. When they arrived, they saw a family of ducks swimming in the pond. "Hello, there. We heard that there's a new family of ducks in town. We wanted to say hello and welcome you to the forest," said the rabbit. "Thank you so much. We're happy to be here," said the mother duck. The silly goose and its friends spent the rest of the day playing with the ducklings and getting to know their new neighbors. As the sun began to set, the group said goodbye to the ducks and started heading back home. As they walked, the silly goose thought about the lessons it had learned that day. It realized that it's important to take care of its home and to be kind to others. It felt grateful for its new friends and couldn't wait for their next adventure together. One day, while wandering in the fields, Silly Goose stumbled upon a lost little lamb. The lamb was bleating pitifully, and Silly Goose immediately knew that he had to help. Despite the lamb's protests, Silly Goose picked him up gently in his beak and began to search for his mother. As they searched, Silly Goose chatted with the lamb, telling him silly jokes and stories to keep him from getting scared. They walked for what seemed like hours, until they came upon a group of sheep grazing in a meadow. Silly Goose gently placed the lamb on the ground and waddled over to the sheep, explaining the situation. One of the sheep, the mother of the lost lamb, immediately recognized her baby's bleat and rushed over to him. Silly Goose felt a sense of pride and joy at having helped the little lamb reunite with his mother. He knew that he had done a good deed and that it was all thanks to his determination and kindness. From that day on, Silly Goose continued to go on adventures with his animal friends, but he always kept an eye out for those in need. He knew that even the smallest creatures could use a helping hand, and he was always willing to offer his. One day, the Silly Goose decided to take a walk in the woods alone. She wanted to find new friends and see new things. As she wandered, she saw a group of squirrels playing together. "Hello, Silly Goose," one of the squirrels said. "Would you like to play with us?" The Silly Goose was thrilled to have new friends to play with. They ran and chased each other through the woods, playing tag and hide and seek. The Silly Goose was having so much fun that she didn't realize how late it was getting. As the sun started to set, the Silly Goose realized she needed to head back home. But she didn't know how to get back to her pond. She started to panic, but the squirrels reassured her that they knew the way. Together, the Silly Goose and the squirrels set off through the woods. They walked and walked until they finally reached the edge of the forest. But when they got there, the Silly Goose still didn't recognize anything. "I think we went the wrong way," she exclaimed. The squirrels apologized and offered to keep looking for the Silly Goose's pond. They walked for what seemed like hours until they finally found it. The Silly Goose was overjoyed to see her home again and thanked the squirrels for their help. From that day on, the Silly Goose never went on an adventure without first making sure she knew the way back home. And she always remembered to thank her friends for their help. One day, as the Silly Goose waddled around the forest, it came across a group of animals gathered around a pond. Curious, the goose waddled over to see what was going on. It turned out that a young turtle had gotten its foot stuck between two rocks in the pond and was unable to free itself. The Silly Goose felt sorry for the turtle and wanted to help, but it didn't know how to swim. It tried flapping its wings to create a breeze, hoping it would help the turtle, but it didn't work. The other animals were also at a loss for what to do. Just then, a wise old beaver appeared and saw the commotion. He quickly assessed the situation and realized that the turtle's foot was stuck because a branch had fallen on it. He quickly gnawed through the branch, freeing the turtle. The turtle was grateful and thanked the beaver, who in turn thanked the Silly Goose for bringing attention to the problem. From that day on, the Silly Goose learned the importance of asking for help and working together with others to solve problems. As the sun began to set, the animals bid each other farewell and the Silly Goose waddled back to its cozy nest, feeling grateful for the valuable lesson it had learned that day. And with that, we conclude part 7 of the tale of the Silly Goose. Stay tuned for the next chapter to see what adventures await our silly friend. Good night, little ones, and sweet dreams. As the days went by, the Silly Goose continued to have new adventures with her animal friends. One day, they decided to play a game of hide and seek. The Silly Goose was it, and she searched high and low for her friends. She looked in the bushes, under the trees, and even in the pond. But try as she might, she couldn't find anyone. As she searched, the Silly Goose began to get frustrated. She had always been good at finding her friends before, but now she was having no luck. Just as she was about to give up, she heard a soft giggle coming from behind a nearby rock. Excitedly, the silly goose ran over to the rock and found her friend, the rabbit, hiding behind it. "I found you," she exclaimed with a grin. The rabbit giggled again and hopped out from behind the rock. "Good job, silly goose," he said. "You're getting better at this game." The silly goose felt a surge of pride in her chest. She had found her friend, and it felt great. As the game continued, she searched even harder and found more and more of her friends. By the end of the game, she had found everyone and was declared the winner. As they all walked home together, the silly goose realized that finding her friends had been a lot of fun. She had learned that it wasn't about winning or losing the game, but about the joy of spending time with her friends and working together to have fun. From that day on, the silly goose felt even closer to her animal friends and was grateful for every moment they spent together. As the summer days turned into autumn, the silly goose and its animal friends continued to have adventures and make memories. They went on picnics, played games, and explored the beautiful forest together. The silly goose had learned so much about friendship and responsibility, and it was grateful for the love and support of its dear friends. As the leaves turned orange and red, the silly goose knew that it was time to prepare for the winter ahead. It said goodbye to its friends and set off on a journey to find a warm place to stay during the cold months. It searched high and low, through fields and forests, until it finally came across a cozy barn where a family of horses lived. The silly goose asked the horses if it could stay with them for the winter, and they welcomed it with open arms. For months, the silly goose lived happily with the horses, sharing warmth and stories on long winter nights. And when spring finally arrived, the silly goose knew that it was time to say goodbye and return to its forest home. As it soared over the trees and fields, the silly goose felt a sense of pride and gratitude for all that it had learned and experienced. It knew that it had grown and changed for the better, and it was excited to see what new adventures lay ahead. As the silly goose landed in the familiar forest clearing, it smiled and quacked a happy greeting to its animal friends. They welcomed it back with hugs and laughter, eager to hear all about its winter adventures. And as the sun set behind the trees, the silly goose and its friends settled in for a cozy night together, grateful for the love, friendship, and adventures that they had shared. As the goose tucked itself into bed, it thought about all of the fun times it had shared with its friends, and all of the lessons it had learned along the way. As it closed its eyes, the silly goose smiled and whispered, "Good night, my friends. Thank you for the best day ever. I can't wait to see what adventures we'll have tomorrow." And with that, the goose fell asleep, dreaming of all of the silly adventures to come. So, my dear little ones, always remember to embrace your silly side and enjoy life's adventures with your friends. And with that, I bid you a creative and adventurous good night.